Welcome to The Explainer. Today, we've got a story for you that's, well, it's less of a biography and more like a spiritual map. We're going to trace a path from the total disillusionment of a whole generation to the really profound, lifelong devotion of one single person. Okay, this quote, it just perfectly sets the stage, doesn't it? It really speaks to the journey of a woman named Joan, who was kind of adrift in the chaos of the 1960s. And her story starts exactly like this. Not some raging river, but just a trickle, a quiet, deep down yearning for something more, something huge. So, to really get Joan's journey, we first have to understand the world she was so desperate to escape from. Her story kicks off with his call to adventure, one that was forged right in the crucible of 1960s America. Yeah, this phrase, it just cuts right to the heart of the matter. See, for Joan, and honestly for so many people in her generation, the problem wasn't that they didn't have stuff. It was a deep, profound lack of meaning. This inner restlessness, this gnawing void, that's what lit the fuse for her epic search. I mean, think about it. The whole cultural landscape was just in total turmoil. You had politics, the Vietnam War. It was creating this massive disillusionment. All the promises of materialism just rang hollow. So for Joan, the Western world, her world, just didn't seem to have any answers for inner freedom. This wasn't just about running away. It was about actively seeking something real. So pretty soon, that inner quest started to spill out into the real world. Her physical journey to the East became like a literal manifestation of her search for meaning. And she wasn't alone. She joined thousands of others on what was the defining path of that era, the hippie trail. And look, this wasn't just a backpacking trip. It was so much more than tourism. Every single stage of her journey mirrored some kind of internal shift. Europe, that was the first break from everything she knew. The Middle East, that's where she started to shed all those layers of Western conditioning. And then Afghanistan. That became the pivotal crossroads, the place that got her ready for what was coming next. And then, as it so often happens, the next big turning point came completely out of the blue. She's in this busy restaurant in Afghanistan, and a chance encounter literally changes everything. She bumps into these English travelers, and they start telling her, with this real sense of awe, about a young master they just met in India. And bam! That was the beacon. Suddenly, her vague, shapeless search for peace, that gnawing void we talked about, it suddenly had an address. A real, concrete, even if it was super far away, destination. Her quest finally had a name and a place. Dehradun, India. Okay, so her journey finally has a target. This next part? This is the climax of her entire search. It's that moment of truth, happening on a simple porch, that would go on to define the entire rest of her life. So picture this. She finally arrives in Dehradun, and the air is just electric. You could almost feel the energy. Joan would later talk about waiting on that porch, her heart just hammering in her chest with this crazy mix of hope and, let's be honest, pure terror. This was it. This was the finish line after thousands and thousands of miles. And then he comes out. But it's not some ancient, wise-looking guru with a long beard. It's Prem Rawat, a 12-year-old kid. And he just slices right through all her preconceived notions, all her spiritual expectations, with one simple, direct question. And her answer was just as simple. It was like the perfect summary of her entire journey, everything she was in that one moment. This tiny exchange, she would say later, had that magic ingredient she'd been looking for the whole time. But wait, the young master doesn't just give her an easy answer. Nope. Instead, he gives her a challenge. He says, search all of India first. And this wasn't him pushing her away. It was a really profound teaching. It basically forced her to make sure that if and when she came back, it would be because she was 100% certain. No doubts. So after finding her answer and really solidifying that conviction, Joan's role just does a complete 180. She comes back to the U.S. in April 1971, but this time she's not a seeker anymore. Now she's an advocate. She has a mission. Now, getting him to America? That was going to take some creativity. Remember, this is way before email or anything like that. So she uses the most urgent tool she has, the Western Union telegram. And she doesn't just send one. She launches this relentless campaign, just barraging them with messages. It was this incredible form of spiritual advocacy, just fueled by pure devotion. And her role was huge. It was so much more than just sending telegrams. She wasn't just an advocate. She became a key organizer, putting together the very first events in the US. And maybe most importantly, she acted as an interpreter, bridging this massive cultural gap for Western audience that was starving for this message.
And you know what? All that work totally paid off. Prem Rawat lands in Los Angeles in July 1971, and the scene she describes is just wild. Exhilarating chaos. The events were just mobbed. It was this raw, electric wave of spiritual hunger. People were literally desperate to hear him.
All right, so this final section is all about how her devotion evolved over time. We're going to trace her journey from that explosive public excitement of the early 70s to a much more mature, stable, lifelong practice, one that really integrated the spiritual with the day-to-day practical. And she was right at the center of it all, especially during the movement's golden age. She co-emceed Millennium 73, this absolutely massive event at the Houston Astrodome. Her voice was literally guiding thousands of people, which really cemented her place at the very heart of the movement in America. And this shift is so important to understanding her whole life. Her devotion went from that public, super high energy golden age to something deeply personal, something integrated into her daily life. That evolution shows you how real and lasting her commitment was, way beyond all that initial hype. Later in life, living in Woodstock, she stayed totally unwavering. Even when the organization went through this really difficult family split, she started weaving her spiritual path together with holistic healing, things like polarity therapy and working with crystals. It was this beautiful demonstration of how that inner peace could turn into real, practical, compassionate service for her community. And this, right here, is probably the biggest takeaway from her entire life. In interviews later on, she'd look back on her youth with a bit of a laugh, but she always came back to this one constant truth. Her understanding changed, sure, but that magic ingredient she found on that porch in Dehradun, that feeling in her heart, it never, ever changed. It was always the core of her life. And that's really why her journey is so compelling, right? It's not just about one person. It's a map. It's a cartography of the spirit that charts a course through a drama we all understand, that search for something real, something that lasts, in a world that's always full of confusion and change. So, we're going to leave you with the very same question she had to answer on that porch. It's a question that really cuts through all the noise, stripping everything else away. And it just might be an invitation to start your own inner journey.